Well, good morning and welcome to Spirituality Basics. Basically, it's a platform where I take up some basic topics on spirituality, primarily with the objective of creating awareness on spirituality. And secondly, of course, you gain some basic knowledge about the topic that is being discussed. Firstly, today is 15th August, so happy Independence Day to all of you. And it's very topical also. The topic being discussed, it's independence from all your sufferings, happiness. So let's see what the branch of science, that is positive psychology, has to say about happiness. This is the picture of Professor Martin Seligman. He is called the father of positive psychology. It's a domain that's very new, in fact, about just little more than 20 years old. Earlier, psychology or psychiatry meant dealing with sick people who are suffering and how to make them better. Positive psychology deals with human strengths. Happiness, character, concentration, not illnesses and weaknesses. And Vedanta is as you know, is an ancient spiritual philosophy based on the Upanishads. And Vedanta also shares similar goals. So what are you trying to achieve in Vedanta? It is Atyantika Dukkha Nivritti Paramananda Prapti. That is complete transcendence of suffering and attainment of ultimate bliss. Attainment of bliss and human happiness are on the same page. Only difference is that human happiness is a finite happiness, meaning that it has an end. But the spiritual happiness that is talked of, the ultimate happiness, that is the infinite happiness. They call it bliss, eternal. So now first let's look at what positive psychology says about happiness. Martin Seligman, in his book, this is the cover of the book, Authentic Happiness, he listed out 3 types of happiness that we experience. He gave this formula, that is happiness is equal to P plus E plus M. P stands for pleasure, E is for engagement, and M is meaning. We'll take it one by one. So pleasure is something that we normally turn to, when we want happiness, when we want to experience some positive emotion. It could be a nice dinner, buying a nice perfume, or watching a movie, buying a fancy car. All this comes under pleasure. And basically, as you will see, these are sensory happiness. We indulge in these things to please our senses. But Professor Seligman says that it is at the lowest rung of happiness because it has its own problems. Now, what are the problems? Firstly, it is transient, temporary. Since the pleasure referred here is primarily dealing with the pleasing of the sense organs, it is temporary. It stays for a while. You have the ice cream, you feel good for some time, then it's gone. Secondly, it is habit forming. Since it has given you pleasure, you would want more of that. You crave for that. And if you have it at the same time, the law of diminishing marginal utility applies. We all know that. It's a famous economics law. The 5th Rasgulla will not give you the same amount of pleasure as the first one. Every unit of things that you consume, it gives you lesser and lesser happiness. So what are you doing? We are satisfying our senses, maybe to the utter disregard of the intellect. Intellect may want something else. You might be having diabetes, so the Rasgulla is a strictly no-no. But then you are pleasing your sensory organs that are so strong, it overrides the intellect. And then also there is the risk of you becoming an addict. If it is drugs or something, drugs also gives you some happiness, some sensory happiness. So if you indulge in drugs, then these pleasures may lead to a bigger problems, like you become a drug addict, legal problems like that. The famous author William Somerset Maugham, we all know of him, he said that if you chase pleasure single-mindedly, very soon you will find that nothing pleases you anymore. mind you, Somerset Maugham was very much influenced by Advaita Vedanta. I mean, so much so that he came all the way to Tamil Nadu to meet Ramana Maharishi. And his thoughts on Advaita Vedanta prompted him to write the famous novel, The Razor's Edge. In fact, the name is taken from one of the verses of Katha Upanishad. Even in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 2, Sri Krishna repeatedly warns Arjuna about the dangers associated with pleasures as well as suffering arising out of the sense organs. I mean, he says that they both are impermanent, temporary, and they come and go just like the seasons. So, tolerate them without getting ruffled by them. Now, Seligman says that much more happiness that you find in the pleasure, you find in the second kind, that is engagement. Engagement means when you are absorbed in some activity with full focus, full concentration, you lose your self-consciousness. You are in a flow, and it could be your studies, it could be a job, it could be a hobby, anything. So that he calls engagement, and he says you find more happiness than pleasure. Confucius says that, choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. I don't know how many of us are fortunate to, live like that. Engagement is different, or you can say even opposite of positive emotion that pleasure is. Let's say if you are fishing, with full concentration, and you are in flow, you lose the sense of time. But actually, if you see, it may not be pleasurable at all. Physically, by the sensory organs, it may not be a pleasurable experience. You could be sitting in the sun, sweating, but you are in flow, full concentration. So time stops for you, and it surely contributes to your happiness. The flow is the word, we have seen it before. It's a word coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's a state of deep, effortless involvement, and it occurs when we concentrate our undivided attention on activities that are, moderately challenging to us. Seligman recommends that in order to achieve flow, you must identify your signature strengths, or some strengths that are, deeply characteristic of yourself, and learn how to practice them. That's only how you achieve flow. Because if you do not have the strengths, then, you won't feel interested in it. And if the challenge is too high, so again, there won't be flow, because you won't see any successes. And even if the challenge is very low, it's something which is, unchallenging, then there will be boredom. So to achieve flow, the challenge and your capability, they must be matching. So that's when you attain flow. That's what he means. A very interesting experiment done in 1930 in the schools of America. 6,000 children were involved, and the experiment was very funny. The students who behaved well, they would be rewarded with more work, and you have to stay in the class and do some classwork. And if they are naughty, then they will be allowed to go out and play. Almost the opposite of what actually happens. But then kids will be kids. First few days, they wanted to go out and play. But within the next 2-3 days, almost all the kids, they said that they didn't want to go out and play. What they wanted was, to do something, whether it's drawing, maths, or anything that they liked. So this shows something very interesting. It shows that we need some kind of engagement, challenges in our lives. The children, as you saw, that they were given a choice between engagement and pleasure. So first they took pleasure, but very soon they wanted some kind of engagement, some kind of work which they could do. Next, Seligman says that even more satisfying than engagement is meaning, having a meaningful life. That is the M of the formula. It means leading a life of meaning that belongs to and serves something that is bigger than yourself. I mean, usually pleasure is all about myself, I mean, I do these things, I eat ice cream to please my senses. Engagement is more or less about myself, although, I interact with others, it's more or less about myself. Whereas meaning is usually when others are involved. I mean, it may not always be human beings. I mean, it could be for the sake of science, arts, or even religion. Basically, what you are doing, that you are serving something or somebody that is bigger than the self. I mean, it's a humanitarian approach. Seligman, who was a professor in the University of Pennsylvania, I mean, he conducted a study in his class. I mean, one day all the students came to the class and he says that today no studies, we will go and watch a movie. So very happy, all the students were very happy. They went and saw a movie. So when they returned, Professor Seligman, he gave them a survey sort of a thing that they have to give a tick in a scale of 1 to 5, the level of happiness which they achieved after seeing the movie. People gave different, they were all happy. So most of them gave 5 and different grades they gave. So that's over. So next week, again, Seligman says, today also no class. Again, everyone was happy. So everyone thought they're going for another movie. But he said that no, I mean, today we will not go to a movie. So we will go to a locality. And it's a locality of underprivileged people. So we go and serve them, give them food, toys. We spend time with them. And that's what they did. So again, they came back and they were told to rate their happiness. So everyone gave a rating of their happiness. Now, 6 months later, the students were asked by Professor Seligman that, remember, we went to a movie 6 months back. So how much happiness going to the movie is giving them now? That's what he asked. And many even didn't remember the name of the movie. So, they said, okay, maybe 1, some gave 2, some gave 0. So like that. Then he asked them, you try to remember the next week we went to that locality. We talked to the people, we served them, we spent time with them. So how much happiness does that give to you right now? And almost all of them rated very high the happiness, that it gave them even after 6 months. What it shows that when you do something for others, you expand beyond the self. Maybe you are even giving your money, your time for others and not getting anything in return, tangible. Yet that gives you a happiness that is a longer lasting happiness. So what Seligman suggests is that we should have a mix of meaning and engagement factor as much as possible in our lives if we want a lasting satisfaction and lasting happiness. Now we come to a little bit of Vedanta. As you know, in Vedanta, we have the concept of Purushartha. Basically, it shows the purpose of our life. We live our lives, so we have some purpose. So it gives 4 categories that all our actions can be characterized into. Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha. We all heard of that. Although when we say it, we call it Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. In that order. When we write it, it's in this order. Why? Because it is presumed that Dharma comes first, and even if you are working for Kama or Artha, you should be doing it within the boundaries of Dharma. So that's why we say Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Now you'll see how beautifully it maps, on the Seligman's equation. Kama is desire or for pleasure, for the sensory organs. So it is the P component. Artha literally means wealth, power, achievement. I mean, basically all that we want in life, and it in a way, I mean, matches against engagement. Because whether you're a doctor or a teacher, you are doing it for your livelihood. So that's also the engagement. Because if you're a doctor, you are engrossed in your activity as a doctor. If you're a teacher, you're engrossed in your activity as a teacher. So that's engagement. Dharma is a very wide term. It means religion, morality, ethics, etc. So in a way, again, with a little bit of stretch, it can be mapped against the meaning in life. Moksha, I mean, it's not explicitly mapped here, but I mean, Seligman could have tried to map it against meaning itself, or maybe when positive psychology, as I said, it is just about 20-25 years old. So if it evolves further, maybe 10 years down the line, you will see someone coming up with a new theory which could be mapping the moksha factor also. Now the problem is the pleasure and meaning, they are pulling in different directions. To have a meaningful life, you will have to sacrifice some of your present pleasures, because you are doing something and you are having a meaningful life. If you want to have a meaningful life, you want to serve others, you are sacrificing that time which you could be using for pleasing your senses, something which is pleasurable to you at that very point of time. So the question is it better to be happy now or in the future? Because the pleasure factor, it gives you immediate happiness. But the meaningful factor, the M factor, although it may not give you immediate happiness, that much of happiness, but again, yes, I mean, as we just saw, it gives you a lasting happiness. 6 months down the line also, the students could feel the happiness that they achieved serving the people. So what is better? But the right question would have been that how can I be happy now also and also in the future? So this Professor Seligman's formula doesn't answer, and at best he says that you have the maximum component of engagement and meaning, to have a lasting happiness. But then pleasure is something which is undeniable. We all indulge in pleasures in our day-to-day activities. So this is where Vedanta comes in. Now, what Vedanta says about happiness? And we'll start at the highest point, and I will quote this verse number 4 from Ashtavakra Gita. It's a small book, where the sage Ashtavakra gives advice to King Janaka. And it's a simple Sanskrit, so I'm just reading out the Sanskrit slok also. Yadi deham prithak kritya chiti visramaya tisthasi adhunaiva sukhi santo bandho mukto bhavisyasi. It means if you separate yourself from the body and abide in pure consciousness, right now, right here, you will attain ultimate bliss. You will attain peace and be free from bondage forever. Thomas Byrom, he was also an author, so he did an English translation of Ashtavakra. I mean, it's called The Heart of Awareness. So he says something very profound about Ashtavakra. He says that when all the scriptures of the world have fallen silent, Ashtavakra begins. Very profound. I mean, maybe after Ashtavakra, there is only the silence of Ramana Maharishi. But if you see the translation, the first word is important. If. That is, if we are interested in seeking something higher than the perishable body and mind. Because whatever you do in life, this body will perish and body will go one day. So whether a sensible soul, a mature soul, it's always interested in seeking something higher, something beyond. So is there a solution to the human problem? I mean, can you find permanent peace and bliss? Can suffering be transcended? He asked these questions. Now, that is the big if. I mean, if that is your quest, then Ashtavakra says Vedanta will work. I mean, if not, then you go on with your life. I mean, you live wisely or unwisely. I mean, if you live wisely, you will be happy. If you live unwisely, you will be unhappy. So life will go on. Because our body-mind complex is so strong, that I mean, we are just not willing to consider anything else. I mean, that is why he says this big if. Now, remember the story of Nachiketa in Katha Upanishad, the dialogue between Nachiketa and Yamraj. So the Yamraj gave Nachiketa the chariot model to, explain Vedanta in a very nice way. I mean, we should all remember this model so that it helps us to, identify ourselves as distinct from the body-mind complex. I mean, there Nachiketa was told by Yamraj that he says, imagine you are the passenger in the chariot and your body is the chariot. Chariot is the body, you are the passenger. The horses that pulls the chariot, the 5 horses, are the 5 Gyanendriyas, the sense organs. The rein which controls the horses is your mind. And the charioteer who drives the chariot is your intellect. So, it's a pointer that we are different from our body and mind. You are the passenger. You are just observing everything. You are not the driver of the chariot. Neither you are the chariot itself, which is the body. And remember, Vedanta says that we already are free now and here. And we already are complete and perfect. And that's our true nature. And that is the source of inner happiness. But this inner reality is hidden. It's well hidden. I mean, it's covered with a veil of ignorance, Maya, as we call it. So we have to remove it to achieve happiness. And how? I mean, it is by gaining true knowledge about our real self. And also, very important, happiness in Vedanta depends on karma. We saw the law of karma, the causality. The belief there is whatever is happening to us, good and bad, it is the result of our past action, something we have done in the past, and whatever we are doing now, that will generate either good or bad results in the future. That's the law of karma. As Swami Vivekananda famously said in his poem, the Song of the Sannyasin, good, good, bad, bad, and none escape the law. But whoever wears the form must wear the chain too. So there is no escape. I mean, everyone has to pass through the law of karma. So the law of karma basically says if you do good, the result is happiness. And if you do bad, which is not as per the dharma, the result is dukkha, which is unhappiness or suffering. And we all have the baggage of, past karmas, and some of it definitely are bad karmas for which we necessarily have to pass through the suffering. But till such time that you exhaust your bad karmas, I mean, what you can do is generate some happiness, basically by gradually transcending the suffering. Remember the 2-arrow story of Buddha? The actual pain, whether it is physical or emotional, that is just 20% of our suffering. The balance 80% is the reaction, how we react to such pain. And that, Buddha said, spirituality can take care of. So basically, Vedanta says that only that thing which is unlimited in nature, and that only can give you permanent happiness. I mean, how can a finite object, which is a worldly object, a material object, can give you infinite happiness? I mean, that's if you want infinite happiness. Otherwise, we are happy with doing our activities pleasing our sensory organs. Vedanta talks of Satchit Ananda, which is our true nature and which is to be realized. Satchit Ananda, as you know, it means existence, consciousness, bliss that is permanent. So at that point, there is actually no happiness also, truly speaking, which is is a positive emotion, elated feeling, or even sadness. It is a state of eternal bliss. But today we will not dwell much on that. I mean, that's little esoteric. So today we will see the practical aspects of happiness. We will be discussing on the Vyavaharik Satya, or the the transactional world, because that's what we are experiencing at the moment. So it's better to discuss on that. We will examine happiness from two angles. Firstly, how our outlook can determine our happiness, or you may say how to react internally to adverse situation, outside situations. And secondly, we'll talk about some practices in life that generally has the potential to make us feel happy. I mean, I had no choice but to qualify this statement, because happiness, as I said earlier, it's such a relative term that it's quite possible that something that which gives me happiness may not give you happiness at all. These are the results of studies which have been done by the positive psychologists. We'll just see. Firstly, is happiness is a choice. I'm sure we all have heard it often, that have we been able to implement it in our lives fully? Maybe not. I mean, let's see what it is. Now it says that no matter how hard the situation is, you can always decide whether you settle for the negative, or if you appreciate the positive in the situation, go for the positive. But although the decision is entirely on us, to react to the situation, most people, most of us, it has been seen, we choose to dwell on the negative because that's the easier option. I mean, taking responsibility and shifting your mind to the positive it's hard, and it's harder than just accepting the misery and blaming external reasons for your suffering. Our mind is designed for that. If your son is getting late to reach home, I mean, we always think of our mind always think of the negative first. I mean, accident to nahi ho gaya. We will never think that maybe the work he has gone, that's taking a longer time. Our mind is designed for that. According to Sadhguru, our experience of life is determined by us, not by what's happening around us. Joy and misery are coming from within you. I mean, that's exactly what he's trying to say. Choose happiness. It sounds easy to be true, but the struggle is that we need to choose it all the time. At every moment, you have to take a decision about this happiness. And on any given day, you will find a number of reasons for not to be happy. Yet, who took that decision? Only you took that decision. Because that's how our mind is designed to be. We take it by instinct. Through our past sanskaras, we take it by instinct. And to some extent here also, intellect we don't allow the intellect to come into play. You can't choose, but whatever happens to you throughout the day, because that's what the world is throwing at you. And you can't change the behavior of the person in front of you, of your fellow people. Yet, what you can do, and you can always do, is choosing your own state of mind and what to focus on. That's completely in your control. I mean, we don't do that. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he said, he puts it very nicely, that a person can make himself happy or miserable regardless of what's happening outside, just by changing the contents of consciousness. That's exactly sums it all. It's all on us. Take control of your mind. Again, we just saw it has everything to do with our mind. And studies have shown that 40% of our happiness can be controlled. That is by controlling our reaction to the situations. It's not what's happening outside that makes us happy or unhappy, but our reactions to it. Because as we just saw, that some amount of suffering is almost mandatory in all our lives because of the past karmas that will happen to you. There is no escape. But how you react to those situations will determine whether you end up being happy or unhappy. First, look at the mind itself. It has been found that if the mind is agitated and not calm, then even if the circumstances are favorable and pleasant, then also you will not be able to enjoy the positive emotions of happiness. That is, if your mind is not calm. Sri Krishna famously said in Bhagavad Gita, it's a very famous verse, that a controlled mind is your best friend and an uncontrolled mind is your worst enemy. Now see this picture. There are 3 cars. They're all stuck in a traffic jam. There is the red light which is there, but there is a traffic jam, ahead of the red light there is a jam. And the first 2 drivers, the emoji is of unhappiness, but the third car, you see a smiling on the face. So instead of becoming frustrated and busy, so we can always try to focus on things, that makes us happy. We can play some good, if you're stuck in the traffic, you can play some good music and sing along. It can make you happy. You can call up your friends. Of course, when the car is standing, and plan for some vacation or something. You can send a nice message to someone you love, or if nothing, you can just close your eyes and take a deep breath and allow your mind to rest. So you are not focusing on the traffic. You are not letting your mind getting agitated. And if you do these things, what you are doing, you are effectively influencing the 40% of your happiness, which is in your control. And it may not sound like a big deal, but it can make a world of difference to your mental health. It may look very insignificant, but if you try to do it, your mind surely has a positive effect on your mental health. Now, the practical part. If you want to be happy every day, 2 things you need to do. Stop outsourcing happiness and stop outsourcing your unhappiness on the people and circumstances. In other words, we need to stop attributing our happiness to what is happening externally, and we need to stop blaming others for our unhappiness, because it's basically you who is making the decision. So as long as you do that, to let your mind to be swayed by the people and circumstances, the happiness will be very unstable and very elusive. So the key is control your response and reaction. And it's all in the mind. But as we know, it's difficult to achieve, and practical difficulty. Even Arjuna says in Bhagavad Gita that the mind is turbulent as the wind. So the second job is to actively cultivate a source of peace and a source of happiness coming from inside our own mind. Because we have seen that happiness and unhappiness are states of mind. Therefore, the real causes cannot be found outside the mind. So if we have a peaceful state of mind, we will be happy regardless of the external circumstances, regardless of the people, whatever the world throws at you. If our mind is unpeaceful and agitated, then even if we have a very happy and pleasant circumstance, you will find it impossible to be happy. So in other words, it's not what's happening or not happening that is making us happy or unhappy. It is how we are responding to those things that determines whether we feel happy or unhappy. I mean, it's what's the state of our mind that is determining our happiness and unhappiness. Now, how to cultivate a stable peace of mind? How to cultivate it? I mean, this is regardless of the external circumstances. This is where meditation comes into play. And when I am talking of meditation here, meditation is not just, sitting 30 minutes in the morning or sometime in the evening, sitting there, closing your eyes, trying to meditate. Of course, I mean, you will do that. But more importantly, it is having a meditative state of mind throughout the day. So that's when you will be able to control your reactions. Of course, the morning meditation time is important, because as you have seen that our sense organs, they what they listen to is habit, abhyasa, practice. So you have to get into the habit of the meditative state of mind, for which the morning 30 minutes are very important. But then gradually you should find that 30 minutes getting reflected in whatever decision you take throughout the day. So we will say that throughout the day you are in that meditative state of mind. And here again, basically what you will have to do is, since it's a matter of choice, you are choosing between how to react. So that means you are letting your intellect coming into play. And introspection is very essential. Otherwise, you will not come to know, whether how we have reacted. So introspection every day, while you are doing the meditation in the morning, a part of it could be for introspection. Next is a bombshell. I'm sure in the question answer session, many of you will not agree. Money doesn't buy happiness. And by the way, it's not me who is saying it. I mean, it's a data-based finding by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi in his book Flow, where he did a study over half a century in the US, where we'll just see, but the personal income of the people in the study, it has tripled, but it did not affect, how happy those people were. We'll just see. This is the graph. If you see the graph, you will notice that the level of happiness, it has remained more or less at the same level over the years, although the income has shot up sharply. Of course, the income is, adjusted for inflation. So this is part of the study. So what he says is that after some basic point, where your basic needs have been met, that's, you can say, your roti, kapda or makan, having a, good education, a nice house, and your health, basic needs have been met. Beyond that, even buying a bigger house or a bigger car, that isn't the way to happiness. I mean, it can bring, some fleeting moments of happiness, some burst of happiness, but it's very temporary. And very soon, you are back to your original level of happiness. I mean, that's what the study showed. So happiness is all about changing the contents of your consciousness. And then he came out with the concept of flow, that we have already seen in the engagement factor. Now, the most practical part, we look at some acts, some tiny acts that can, again, I say generally fuel your daily happiness. And I mean, they have the potential to generate happiness. Generally, I mean, it's not a blanket promise, so don't fight with me. It may work for some, it may not work for others, but generally it works. Firstly is relationships, very important. It has been found by the Harvard study of adult development. I mean, it's the longest running study. Some of you might know. I mean, it went on it's still going on for 75 years. They tracked down the lives of 724 men. Year after year, asking them about their work, their home lives, their health. And what they found that the people who are socially connected to family, to friends, to community, they are much happier, they are healthier, and they live longer. And maybe this could be one of the reasons that we have so many social networking sites are flourishing. I mean, that's our basic nature. And this was also stated by Martin Seligman. He said about P, E, and M, that is pleasure, engagement, and happiness. This formula he revised in his subsequent book that he wrote. This was in Authentic Happiness. Subsequently, he wrote a book called Flourish, where he reframed the phrase PEM into Parma. Parma, where the R stands for relationships and A is for accomplishments and achievements. I mean, if we accomplish and achieve something, we get happiness. So that's the thing. Second is practice gratitude. I mean, no matter how bad life seems, there always are small things, to feel happy about. I mean, make a habit of looking out for them. It could be very small, insignificant things like the smell of a flower, the pitter-patter of the rain, the sound of the ocean, the earthly smell of a freshly wet ground. Basically, thank life for each and every moment. I mean, we often take these things for granted. It could even be very obvious facts that so obvious, like you have a place to live, you have friends and family who love you. We all have that. Even we have eyes to see and legs to walk. I mean, there are millions of people, in the world who don't even have these things. So thank God for every moment that you are blessed with these. Next is choose to smile. Turn your frown upside down. Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. He is, in fact. And he is famous for his work on mindfulness and meditation. He said that sometimes the joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes the smile can be the source of your joy. Very nicely put. And there have been studies which have shown that making yourself smile can even lower your heart rate during the stressful situations. In my yoga class also, I mean, I always say, whenever you're doing even something with your closed eyes, and in fact, this you should do when you're doing meditation also, try to just put a hint of a smile on your face. Even when you're doing the Kapalbhati and Anulom Vilom, I say just have a smiling face. And for all the asanas, in fact, for all the asanas, you should not be doing it with a frown, you should do it with a smiling face. Next, choose kindness. When you do kind acts for other people, happiness hormones are released. It boosts your serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter responsible for the feeling of well-being and satisfaction. Next is do some physical activity or exercise. Again, very important. Studies have shown that activities like running, biking, or any other form of exercise, they result in increase in your serotonin levels, which is the happiness hormone. And even otherwise, if you don't have a happy health, I mean, then your mind, instead of focusing on other things, focusing on happiness, your mind will go into your health, some aches and pains in your body. So some physical activity or exercise you must do to keep your body fit. And as I will say that do yoga. But anyway, I mean, you can do anything that you are doing as long as you are fit, it's fine. Next comes meditation. Again, it's coming again. As we saw that ultimately it is the mind that decides that whether you are happy, whether you are sad. It's very important that we take good care of the mind. And we have seen that a calm and composed mind is good for making decisions. A calm and composed mind. I mean, you cannot feel happy unless you have a calm and composed mind. And only meditation helps in that. So take some time out every day, sit quietly. Here I'm talking of the formal meditation, and sit quietly in a quiet place, and do some introspection. I mean, you need not, as they say, blank out your mind. You don't try for that. You do some introspection, dwell your mind on some positive thoughts, and don't try to empty the mind. So that's very difficult. You will feel frustrated. So focus on the positive thoughts, do some introspection, so that it surely results in a calm and a positive mindset, which ultimately will help you in determining your happiness. Finally, the final salvo is choose to be satisfied, because unless you make this choice, nothing will help. Because ultimately, you are taking the decision, you are making the choice. So unless you choose to be happy, nothing will work. As President Roosevelt, I mean, he said that comparison is the thief of joy. So do not feel either happy or sad by comparing yourself to others, because as I just said, we always have that tendency, and we always, try to make us feel miserable, and we do not see the people who are even less privileged than us, and we must always look at the glass as half full rather than half empty. So finally, I would quote Abraham Lincoln, who famously said that most people are as happy as they make up their minds to be. That's all in the presentation. So thank you so much. I will close with the Vedic prayer as usually. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mriturma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Thank you so much.